Hi, so the question I chose is how racial wealth gaps are significantly affecting marginalized low-income communities, which lead to racial inequalities and policies to help bridge these gaps. So the importance of finding a good answer is to find out where the wealth disproportion stands between the races, and then can policies be created to bridge the gap between income equality and race. This is an economics question because it deals with income inequality, specifically targeting racial wealth gaps. And while targeting these racial wealth gaps, it's able to bridge new policies and it's helped to create new resources to help African Americans and to bridge this gap that's been created through slavery and other forms of systematic racism. While talking about racial disparities, it's important to know what the racial wealth gap is. The racial wealth gap is the difference between financial backings among race. Historically, due to slavery, there's been an accumulative of white wealth due to systems like Jim Crow and oppressionary errors. And as seen in the graphs, these family wealths have been significantly higher among these generations. White people have tended to take the majority, and black people have not been the majority, so these policies help bridge that gap. As seen with COVID, a lot of these low income communities did not have a financial buffer that they needed in order to help them with this pandemic. Although the government stimulus did provide them with money, it was simply just not enough. Like they had to choose either between paying their rent or feeding their families, and that was the scenario for many Americans in low income communities. And these COVID pandemic, there's been unemployment too, and we've seen that the racial wealth gap is just increasing, and minorities are at a disadvantage during this pandemic because they do not have the same financial backings as compared to many white people and many middle class neighborhoods. They're struggling during this pandemic, and this is due to the racial wealth gap. A policy that has been addressed to bridge the racial gap is reparations, and this is when the US government would pay descendants of slavery reparations, and this way, African Americans could have an influx of wealth, and due to this influx of wealth, they could purchase new homes, investments, and new businesses. Like they could start up new businesses and they could improve their low income communities and they could make the cities better. And while reparations have ongoing debates, there is something with full employment that could address the structural racism. And with full employment, this is basically when out of the race, like they're paid equally due to this full employment the market, and it's able to keep an equilibrium of made of people to work and workers, and this equilibrium will create a equal rate in part. The wide gap of unemployment with black and white people are blacks are significantly higher in rates of unemployment with the wage gap. A policy that has been created in the past to address the structural racism is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, VII, which protects employees against discrimination from race, national origin, sex, and religion. And under this, it leveled the playing field and it forced employers to consider the objective and not the race when hiring. And the benefit is that it allowed legal opportunity to be taken against companies that are discriminating very blatantly. And a drawback is that many low income people don't have the resources to pursue a legal battle, and they don't have the same amount of access. And these graphs, like it's shown that black people and Hispanics say they're more likely to face discrimination, so they would probably not want to report it. Limitations that come with this question is that the racial wealth gap and racism in the workplace all stem back to slavery. Slavery has a deep-rooted discrimination towards African Americans in modern day, and it's reflected still present in low-income neighborhoods and the racial inequality. And there needs to be acts that are passed in order to help these people and to help them with ongoing economic downturn. Assumptions that you would need to change with reparation is that assuming that black people would spend their money on businesses and houses and not other things, you're assuming that they will be able to stimulate the economy in their low income communities. And with the job ones, you would be able to assume that these employers would hire based on not race and hire based on skill. While dealing with structural racism in the workplace and the wealth gaps that are deep rooted in the prejudice, reparations would stimulate the black economy and it would help push forward and thrive the economy of low income communities and make it better for all. Lastly, these are all the sources that I used, ranging from Moodle, library, all the way down to resources online and websites peer reviewed.